Okay, so here we are. We've got a piece of watercolour paper stuck down with masking tape. That's just to give you a little border and to hold it flat. I've drawn out the little landscape of Munt Chapel, and I've used masking fluid to mask out the sun and the whites on the chapel. Nice and dry. Not been on there too long, maybe 20 minutes or so, and it's dried. Okay, and we're going to now paint the sky. So the sky is made up of, well, the sun is setting, so it's got a variety of reds and purples and blues. So I'm going to use rose madder, alizarin crimson and ultramarine blue to do the sky. But first of all, I'm going to take a large round brush, and this is watercolour. Wet the brush, and I'm just going to do wet the sky. So this is wet in wet that we're doing it, because we want a nice soft sky. Not worried too much about the hills because they're going to be darker, and also around the island and the sea, which is almost white but not quite in this picture, so I will wet that as well. So nice and wet, depending on how hot the environment is where you're working will depend on how quickly that dries. So if you have your colours ready, and I've literally just wet the colours down, and this is rose madder, and I'm just dropping that into the middle of the sky, and then I've got some ultramarine which I'm going to put at the top. And we use ultramarine instead of cerulean blue because the sun is setting, but also because this is a Welsh landscape sky and wouldn't necessarily, especially at this time of year, have any cerulean or cobalt colour in the sky. So quite light on the horizon. I'm just going to put a little bit more along here, just a bit more blue, because it's slightly darker around the sun. I've also got some purple, so if you want to use a bit of purple, that's also a nice colour to put into a soft sunset sky. I'm going to put a little bit of rose madder back in on that side because I want it to be more red or pink than purple. And just let those colours blend. Don't rub your paper too much because it will come up, and just a touch more over here, I think, and leave it. Now, the thing to remember with pale skies is that they will dry lighter, so make sure you've got enough colour. There's nothing worse than a painted sky drying off on you and you finding that it's too light. So make sure you've got enough colour in that sky before you stop painting. But obviously there's a time limit because you don't want to put too much colour in, especially when it's starting to dry off, because it won't blend as much as you like it to. Okay, sooner or later that's going to dry off on you, so just be careful of that. Oh, I've just realised I haven't plugged my microphone in, so the sound might be a bit weird. So I'm just going to stop the sky, dry it off, and then I'm going to plug my microphone in. Okay, so there's our sky all dried off. You can see it's gone a lot paler. So like I said, if you want to practice skies beforehand, then have a go so that you can get the depth of colour correct. Okay, so we're going to use, the next stage is to do the land. Again, use a large brush. You don't have to use small brushes. And we're just going to put an undercoat of this rose madder underneath. Now here is the benefit of the masking fluid, because you can paint, as with the sun like we did just before, you can paint over your chapel without worrying about painting over the white area. Okay, so get that rose madder on there. If you haven't got rose madder, just use alizarin crimson. It's not a colour that's in everybody's watercolour set. So just always, when I'm doing these tutorials, just use the colour that's closest to what you need. Into that mountain. Now the reason why I can do the island with this brush is because it's got a nice point on the end. If you haven't got a brush that has got a nice, like this one, has not got too much of a point on it, it's much more rounded, and you might find it difficult to get into these little tiny areas with a round brush. So take up something like this that's got a nice point on it and use that instead, rather than trying to get into these areas without too much trouble. Now also in this area we've got purple, so we're going to put some purple, and you can see the land is sort of going from left to right downwards in a diagonal way. I've just gone over the water there a little bit, but don't matter. So put that purple down using the same sort of diagonal marks that are there already. This is quite purple, so I'm going to put another layer over the top of that hill there, maybe a bit thicker. Diagonal marks coming down this land here, and again this is darker, so we can put the purple on there also, like that. Okay, leave some lighter patches and some darker patches, and make sure you go right off the edge of the paper. And we'll put another colour on that in a minute. I'm just going to paint this land in a little bit more solidly. There. Okay, there we go. Now you're going to let that dry off again. Right, so the next job is just to darken up these distant hills, and I'm just going to use a bit of purple and some Payne's grey. Again, if you haven't got Payne's grey, you can use black or brown even, just to darken up your colours. Okay, so this hill here is very dark. We're just going to put a nice, again I'm using a smaller brush just so that I can get into these little tiny areas down here, like that. And here you can sort of repair any mistakes that you might have made through using a larger brush previously. So there's that dark hill, and it is darker on the left. So if you put some paint over to the left hand side a little bit more, then that will dry darker than the section that's here. Okay. This one is slightly lighter, so I'm just taking a bit of pigment, the same colour. I've just added a bit more water into it. so that it will be lighter in colour. You can see that now, can't you? Just by the addition of water. You don't need to do anything else to lighten a colour up in watercolour. Just add water. There. And again, it seems to be, I don't know whether this is a condition of the photograph, but it seems to be slightly darker on the left. So just add a dot more pigment just on the left hand side before it dries out. And then the one in the distance is even lighter, but I'm going to use the same colour. Just again adding a dot more water to the mix. And that solidifies that distant hill. So things will always get lighter as they go away in the distance. It's the effect of haze covering the object that you're painting that makes it appear lighter. Okay, there's a hair there, I can see. I don't know whether it's going to come off though. There, got it. I think, yeah, got it. Okay, so again, this side is a little bit fuzzy, so I'm just going to paint that in a bit more. And by painting that darker, it also makes the section around it, which is the sea, lighter. Okay, so again, just let that dry off. But while you're letting that dry off, there's a darker patch down the foreground. So I'm just going to put a bit of that colour onto a bigger brush, and I'm just going to wipe this. Might put a little touch more purple in. Just wipe it across the foreground like that. Just gently. Okay. And the rest of the land is also quite dark. So if you want to take a variety of pigments and just put in some lines like this, just really loosely. Leave the nicer areas. Like I really like that red area there. So I'm going to leave that. Again, going in this diagonal mark making. Use the mark making in the diagonal from the left to the right. If there's any areas that you think, oh yes, that needs to be a bit redder, just put a little bit of red in. Try and leave some of those lighter marks in place. Purple, a bit more purple, I think, down here. You can work from right up so that the mark making changes. You might want to make it a bit darker in places like down here, just to get that. And also there is a line coming down here that's quite dark. That must be a crease in the land. There's a couple here as well, like that. There's a slightly darker patch up here. Not quite that dark though, so take some water and just spread it out a bit. I think I'm just going to put a little bit more purple up here in a line. Okay, I'm going to leave it there because I'm slightly concerned of overworking it. Okay, so now's the time to dry off again. Okay, so now we come to the removal of the masking fluid. This can be quite scary, but if you work inwards, so from the outside in with your finger, then if it tears, then it will tear into the white area and not into your painting surface. So always work inwards, don't work outwards. So I mean that, don't start there and work that way or that way, but work into the shape. And you'll find that it should come off quite easily. Just rub very gently with your finger. And don't be tempted to pull at it, because if you pull at it, it tends to tear. And you might find that you've missed little areas like that one there. Oh no, that's, I think that's still, oh no, that's masking fluid, yeah. I mean, we're working with such little areas here that it doesn't really matter, but it's a lot easier if you can learn to use masking fluid. The other option is to use gouache afterwards and repaint your white areas, or carefully paint around them. But you can see in this instance that it's just impossible, because we wouldn't be able to get this flow of movement in the brush strokes if it wasn't for this masked out area. We'd struggle around this area and it would look stunted. Again, careful with make sure you've got clean fingers, especially if you're working on a light sky like this. Rub into the middle like that. Careful. If it feels like it's pulling the paper, this masking fluid is very temperamental. Just go carefully and slowly. There we go. Okay, so that's worked all right. So now we need little detail brushes, because we're going to put in these windows and things like that, and also the roofs. So the roof is like a slate colour, so I'm going to use a little bit of blue, ultramarine, a bit of purple and a bit of grey, and quite a thick mix. And we're just going to, and I've just realised that that is supposed to be white, so what we'll do is we will use some gouache to reintroduce that area. So I'm just painting in this roof here. So the smaller the brush, the better. This brush is probably a little bit big, but I'm quite confident with my detail painting that I can use it. But the smaller the brush, the better. The more likely you'll be able to achieve the level of detail that you want if you use a small brush. I'm just going to put the side of the chapel in there, and I realise that the perspective is out there, so I'm just going to drop that down a touch. This gives you the opportunity to readjust things if necessary. Now I'm going to have to paint that back in gouache. Here we have a door. Is it an arch door? It looks like an arch door. Tiny door. If you feel like you need to redraw these things in before you paint them, then please do so. There's a square door on that one, like that. A little bit more paint on the brush. I'm just going to paint this. The brush mark has actually left most of the roof exposed, which is strange, but we just need to darken it up a bit. There we go. There's a square window here. Again, draw it in if you're not confident drawing with your brush. There's a little window just above that mark there, and then there's another one coming down there, and then there looks to be another sort of, I don't know what that is, another door maybe. Yep, okay, so that's that done. The sun, even though it's white, it's not white, it needs a little bit of yellow in it. So take a bit of yellow on your brush, add a lot of water, and then just add a touch in, and then just wash it about with a bit of water like that. And you might want to just take out the colour left and right around it like that. Just breaks it up a touch. And we're going to do the same with a little bit of rose madder, just a touch of rose with that water in it. I'm just going to put a bit of that in as well, just to soften that yellow up. Again, just draw it backwards and forwards. So there's the sun, just softened up a little touch. Okay, that'll dry off nicely. I'm just going to put a shadow on this, because I'm not sure what this is. I think it might be part of a gateway. I'm just going to put a shadow on it so it makes a bit more sense. I'm now going to draw the outlines of some of the, must be walls or something that are here. There's a little brow of a hill coming down there. Just do this very pale. You don't want any marks to be too strong. There's a mark that comes up, and underneath the edge there must be, again, either a wall there or the brow, but it is the edge, what looks like the edge maybe, of the grounds that the chapel is sitting in. Just in there like that. I know that there's a brick wall around it, so that's probably what it is. And again, if you want to put some lines, like there's a darker line just here, you can pop those in as well. There's another line coming down here. It gets quite thick. There are some other shadows coming down off of this hill here. There's also a couple of little people, look like people, but don't make them too big or the scale will go. So I think there's two people there walking over the brow of the hill. I'm just going to solidify this edge by painting a little bit of colour just in there like that. Just soften it into the rest of the hill. This edge also is not very clear, but I'm just going to remove and soften that edge, and hopefully that'll help with that issue. Just a little bit of water just to soften it up. There's a mark here that I'm not that pleased with, so again, just a bit of water and just move it around. Not too much water, because you'll end up with cauliflowers. Just move it around a bit and that will soften. Okay, so next bit. I'm just going to take a bit more of that Payne's Grey purple blue mix. I'm just going to put the edge on this wall here. Really fine line. Don't have too strong a colour, because it will look like you're outlining it instead of, there is some sort of, there must be graves or something around here, like that. Okay, so I can see that this sun has dried quite light, and I want to make it stronger. It's one of the reasons why it's not strong enough is because the sky around it is too light. So I'm just going to put another bit of yellow in there just to make it stand out a bit. That seems rather strong, but it will dry lighter. So if you have the same issue as me, whereas you haven't put enough pigment in your sky, then you can always, I don't know what's happened there. That might be a bit of masking fluid actually that I've rubbed off. There's a little bit of a lump there. I'm going to leave it though because it's not worth fiddling with. I could let that dry off and try and remove that later. And there is a little line going across like that. So you could put a couple of lines in if you wanted to. like that. But remember to soften them. So take a clean, damp brush and just soften them in so that they don't stand out too much in that sky, like that. Just soften them with water. Okay, not as bright as I would like it to be actually. I might lift some of it off and take it back to white maybe. Okay, the other problem I've got is that there's a pencil line here. Now there's very little you can do about that. You can always try and paint over it a bit by using a darker pigment like that. So you could sort of bring a little bit more paint up in to the distant sky. But there's very little you can do. Once it's painted over, that's it. Okay. Right, let's get some gouache. I won't be a sec. Now, to restore the bell tower, you can either use gouache. So gouache and a small brush. This is opaque watercolour effectively. So it will paint over the dark pigment there. Or you can use one of these pens, which is what I tend to use. Let me just see if it's working. That one isn't working. So you have to shake these pens to get them working, and they do work eventually. Okay, so these are Posca pens. These are basically acrylic pens. You have to be careful with these because once you put this on, it's not coming off. It's permanent. So make sure you know where you're drawing and that you're confident with your drawing. But you can see how quickly that's restored. And I can also reintroduce the line that's disappeared there. And I can bring this point up here a little bit more. So you can restore whites where you've lost them. Okay, if there's any other white bits. In fact, you could go over your sun there with that if you wanted to restore it back to a bit of white. You can do that with either with these pens or using some gouache. Okay, maybe that tower needs to be a little bigger. There. Okay, so that needs to dry off before I put the little hole in the tower there. Okay, so I'm going to switch the camera off. I'm going to let that dry off, put that back in, and then I'm going to remove this tape and you can see the final picture. So there we have it. There's our finished picture of Munt. I hope you enjoy it. Please go and visit. It's absolutely gorgeous there. And maybe do some on plein air painting. I've sat very regularly just about here looking down on the beach here, which is beautiful, looking out over the island and watching the sunset. I hope you enjoy it, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.